Let's talk about fine dining. Picture the most expensive item on a restaurant menu. It's usually listed at market price, which is restaurant code for if you have to ask, you can't afford it. It arrives on a silver platter. It is red. It is shiny. It is served with a little cup of melted butter and a special fork that looks like a surgical instrument. You put on a plastic bib like a toddler. You crack the shell. You work for your dinner, and you feel rich. You feel sophisticated. You feel like you have conquered the ocean. But let's look at this creature biologically. It has 10 legs. It has antennas. It has eyes on stalks. It eats rotting debris off the bottom of the ocean floor. If you saw this thing crawling out from under your refrigerator in the middle of the night, you wouldn't melt butter. You would burn your house down. It is, essentially, a giant underwater scorpion, a wet insect. So, how did this happen? How did a creature that was once considered garbage meat become the symbol of luxury? How did we let the restaurant industry convince us that eating a sea cockroach is a status symbol? This is the story of the greatest rebranding campaign in human history. This is the story of the lobster. To understand the joke, we have to travel back to the 1600s, to the colony of Massachusetts. Today, if you go to Cape Cod, you see tourists paying $30 for a lobster roll. But in the 17th century, the beaches of New England looked very different. They weren't covered in tourists. They were covered in lobsters, and not in a good way. Historical records tell us that after a storm, piles of lobsters 2 feet high would wash up on the shore. They would sit there, rotting in the sun, smelling like death and iodine. The early settlers didn't look at them and think, yum. They looked at them and thought fertilizer. That's right. The founding fathers didn't dip lobster in butter. They crushed them up and spread them on their cornfields. They fed them to their cows. But the cows didn't even like them. The meat was tough. It was salty. And there was just too much of it. In colonial America, lobster was the protein of last resort. It was what you ate when the rats ran out. It was a sign of poverty. If you saw lobster shells in your neighbor's trash, you didn't think they were having a party. You whispered to your wife, "Oh dear, look at the Smiths. They've hit rock bottom. They're eating the sea bugs again." The reputation of the lobster was so low, so absolutely bottom tier, that it became a legal issue. In the 18th century, indentured servants and slaves in Massachusetts actually revolted. Imagine that, a labor strike. But they weren't striking for more money or shorter hours. They were striking about the menu. They were sick of lobster. Breakfast? Lobster. Lobster. Dinner? Cold leftover lobster. It got so bad that a clause was written into many employment contracts in Boston. It is perhaps the most hilarious labor law in American history. The contract stated, "The master shall not force the servant to eat lobster more than 3 times a week." Think about that for a second. Today, eating lobster 3 times a week is a diet plan for a millionaire. Back then, it was legally classified as cruelty. It was considered abuse. Prisoners in the local jails complained that being forced to eat lobster was cruel and unusual punishment. So, the next time you pay $50 for a tail, just remember, you are paying a premium price for what was essentially 18th century prison loaf. So, how did the cockroach become the king? Did the lobster change? Did it suddenly start tasting like chicken? No. What changed was trains. In the mid-19th century, America built the railroads. Suddenly, you could ship products from the coast to the center of the country. And the brilliant businessmen of New England realized something important. People in Iowa, Kansas, and Missouri had never seen the ocean. They didn't know that lobsters were considered garbage. They didn't know about the piles of rotting shells on the beach. To a guy in Ohio, this wasn't a sea bug. It was an exotic ocean delicacy. The train operators started serving lobster in the dining cars. They marketed it as a rare treat from the deep Atlantic. They charged a high price for it, not because it was expensive to catch. Remember, they were literally tripping over them, but because they knew a secret rule of human psychology. If it's expensive, people will assume it's good. The passengers in the dining cars, wearing their fancy hats, would crack the shells and say, "Oh, how delightful. Tastes like salty rubber, but very distinct." They were eating the marketing, not the meat. Before it became a luxury fresh item, lobster had a brief, weird phase as the spam of the sea. With the invention of canning, industrial factories started packing lobster meat into tins. It was cheap, dirt cheap. In the 1890s, a can of baked Beans cost 5 cents. A can of lobster? 1 cent. It was cheaper than cat food. In fact, it was cat food. People bought canned lobster to feed their kittens. But this mass distribution did something crucial. It normalized the taste. People got used to the flavor without seeing the terrifying alien body of the animal. They forgot the eyes. They forgot the legs. They just knew the pink meat. The trap was set. Now, all they needed was a bunch of rich tourists to snap it shut. By the late 1800s, wealthy New Yorkers and Bostonians started vacationing in Maine. They wanted the rustic experience. They wanted to eat what the locals ate. The locals, who were smart, looked at these city slickers in their silk suits and thought, let's see if we can sell them the bugs. They boiled the lobsters alive, which added a dramatic flair to the cooking process, and served them with melted butter. Let's be honest, you could serve an old shoe if you drowned it in enough melted butter, and it would taste okay. The tourists loved it. They loved the mess. They loved the savage act of cracking the shell. It felt primal. It felt authentic. And when they went back to New York, they ordered it in the city's finest restaurants. The chefs in New York saw an opportunity. They realized that lobster was a Veblen Good. In economics, a Veblen Good is a product where the demand increases as the price increases. If you sell a lobster for $2, nobody wants it. It's trash. But if you sell it for $20, suddenly it's exclusive, it's rare, it's market price. By the 1920s, the transformation was complete. The cockroach of the sea had ascended to the throne. The prison food of the 1700s was now the centerpiece of the Rockefeller dinner table. Fast forward to today. We have fully bought into the con. We have normalized a dining ritual that is, frankly, insane. Imagine if you went to a steakhouse and the waiter brought you a whole dead cow, and he handed you a saw and a plastic apron and said, "Good luck, sir. The best meat is inside the ribs." You would call the police. But with lobster, we accept it. We pay extra for the privilege of performing manual labor at the dinner table. We sit there in our nice clothes, wearing a bib that says, "I'm messy," wrestling with a calcified exoskeleton, squirting juice into our own eyes, desperately digging for a morsel of meat that is mostly cholesterol delivery system for the butter. And we smile. We take a picture for Instagram. We caption it, "Living the life." Meanwhile, somewhere in the ocean, the crabs are looking at the lobsters and thinking, how did you guys pull this off? We taste exactly the same, but you guys got the PR agent. The story of the lobster is the ultimate lesson in branding. It proves that there is no such thing as objective value. Trash is only trash if you call it trash. If you call it a delicacy and you charge $50 for it, it becomes treasure. So the next time you feel bad about your budget or you feel like you aren't classy enough, just remember the lobster. Remember that the symbol of high-class dining is just a giant sea insect that got a really, really good makeover, and who knows, maybe in 100 years, the most expensive item on the menu will be the pigeon. They just need to come up with a better name for it. Sky lobster. Perhaps.